Hey y'all, this is David, the Georgia photographer, and today I'm going to talk a few minutes about like gear selection for the beginning photographer. For me, I started out with autofocus lenses on a Nikon system, and honestly, in today's times, I would wholeheartedly recommend that to any photographer who's just getting into the craft. And I would honestly start out without even changing the camera around. Just put the lens on the camera and go shoot with it. Just get in the zone of taking photos. The sky got in my frame. Taking photos and getting used to using the camera. Learn where the controls are. Learn where the focus ring is, the zoom ring, the shutter release. Figure out how to do exposure compensation. I would start with that one because that one will allow you a lot of latitude in your photos really quickly. Once you learn exposure compensation and adjusting for the sky or whatever, figure out how to turn on the blinkies or the zebras, which shows you what you're overexposing in a frame. Once you get done learning how to do that and learning how to read that scope and then adjusting your exposure compensation to fix it so you don't blow out your sky, because skies on Earth are blue, they're not white. And that's a pretty common problem I see people making, is that they tend to let the computer in the camera determine the exposure. Well, it's trying to fix all that crap, so it wants the shade, the parts in the shade, like this brick wall here behind me, to be a certain level exposure. And if there's a little bit of the sky in the frame, it'll just turn that sky white by increasing the exposure to get the brick wall up. Hey, so there's people driving down the street. They hollered at me. But if you do that, then you can, man, that broke my OODA loop completely. But once you learn exposure compensation, you can actually make the blue sky blue and just let the shadows be dark. And depending on what you want in the photo, but you get the point. Next thing I would recommend doing is switching to Aperture Priority. And what this does is it puts the whole camera in automatic except the aperture. And then what you do is you play with wide open aperture, stopped all the way down aperture. Just play with aperture for a while, like a month or two. Run it for a month or two. And then I done Aperture Priority for a year. It's all I used. I set it on Aperture Priority and shot with it for a full year. I had the little 35mm f1.8 on a Nikon D7000 and loved it. Shot, like I said, shot with that for a year straight. Then after you do Aperture Priority for a while, you don't have to do it a year. You get my point. Do it long enough to get familiar with it and understand what it does for you. Understand that all of the things that come along with just controlling aperture. Switch it to Shutter Priority next. This is the part where you learn how to do panning blurs, because you turn your shutter speed down to 1/20th of a second, and you start learning how to mix motion deliberately into your photos, and you learn how to freeze action. Say you want to take sports photography or wildlife photography. You want a really high shutter speed so you can freeze the subject, even if it's moving. 1/4000th of a second is a quarter of a millisecond. You'll pretty much freeze about any kind of movement short of a hummingbird's wings with that much of a shutter speed. So do that for a while. Shoot it for a while. Learn it implicitly. You notice I haven't told you to buy any new lenses or anything yet. It's because you don't need to. Don't do that until you learn the lens that came with the camera really well. Once you've learned those really well, a lot of times you'll learn that you don't need any more lenses. You don't have to go out and spend any more money on equipment, because what you have will do everything you need. When I went to Israel for a trip, I only took the Fuji X-T3 and the kit lens, and then one other telephoto lens that honestly I never used. Took 2 pictures with it, and I didn't like them, so they didn't make it into the photo album. I shot the whole trip basically with the 18-56 kit lens that came with the X-T3. Perfect tool for that job. So you don't always have to have these super hot rod lenses, and expensive camera bodies, I mean, you get it. You don't have to have it to get good photos nowadays. It becomes a personal choice. But once you do shutter priority a while, then I would recommend starting to look at, like specialty things, because now you've shot with the camera enough, you start to learn what you like to photograph. Now that you know what you like to photograph, start exploring like how to get better photos with that style of photography or that genre of photography. Do you like getting down low next to the ground doing the bug's eye view, or getting up high and doing the bird's eye view, or shooting through loopholes, and do framing with things? Do you like getting up close and personal street photography like Bruce Gildan did? Whatever, floats your boat. But once you figure that out and you realize your kit lens is limiting you in some way of expanding that knowledge base, then you look at a specific tool to improve that skill set. And if it involves a new lens that has a bigger aperture or more zoom range or a longer telephoto or whatever it is, get it then, because now you're not just buying gear to buy gear, you're buying gear because you actually need it to improve on. The gear has become the limiting factor. And at this point that without better equipment, you're not going to improve your skill set either. That's the way I wished I'd learned photography. I did it the other way, which was buy a whole bunch of equipment which sits needlessly in cabinets, and all that money could have been spent on trips. Trips is where it's at, because with trips, you get to explore the world and take photos of it. I didn't think of that at the time. So if you get the opportunity to go on trips, I wholeheartedly recommend doing that. Take workshops. People will rail on workshops, and I really don't understand why they do that, because workshops are awesome. Yeah, you might not learn but one little tip or trick from a workshop. That makes it worthwhile. The camaraderie and spending time with like-minded people in the hobby that you enjoy is way more valuable than a redundant lens that you already have, or another camera body to pile up on the pile with the rest of them, because after 2 or 3 it's kind of pointless. You want 2 because if you drop and break one, you want to back up, but when you have 7, it's a little excessive. I mean, it's personal. You don't have to believe me, but I can only shoot with 1 at a time. So take what I've said with a grain of salt, and as they say, it's worth exactly what you paid for it. But I'd just like to share that with you so that maybe somebody won't make the same expensive mistakes I've made. It's okay to make mistakes and learn from them, but to spend money on equipment and then you have to spend your time and energy trying to recoup that money because you got to sell it now and you got to spend time marketing it and putting it on eBay or whatever. It's just smarter to learn what you need first, then get the equipment you need to improve that. So with that, this is David, the Georgia photographer. Until next time, get your camera out and go take a picture with it, all right? We'll see you later. Bye-bye.